I want you to imagine a scenario where you have two alternatives. The one alternative is starvation. Sure, you can last a while on your fat reserves. You can try to starve it out, as it were. But eventually you're going to go because there are no calories, there's no food. And in this context, this fictional scenario, the alternative is breadcrumbs, maybe some stale pizza crust. And that's all that's thrown to you. On occasion, it's just enough to keep you going. I want you to envision that scenario before I speak on further matters in this video and cement it in your mind. Now, we're often challenged within the manosphere with the idea of Nawalt, with the idea that basic assumptions about human behavior, and more specifically male and female behavior, are incorrect because there exists a plethora of variety and distinctions, and human beings are so variable and so unpredictable. I mean, this is, of course, the tacit assumption built into these types of arguments. They're so variable, so unpredictable, so different from each other that the generalizations you make simply cannot be true. And therefore, you shouldn't generalize about women specifically, or more broadly, human beings. And every now and then, you might encounter an intriguing case that requires, based upon initial inspection, even further investigation, in theory. And so it was that I was in a situation not too long ago where there was a gentleman I was conversing with who was making all sorts of claims about the nature of marriage and women and what have you that, frankly speaking, boggled my mind. I was taken back. I didn't think it could be true. He made statements such as, the way to approach women was to be completely honest. The way to approach women in general in courtship was to reveal yourself completely. And his own proposal, his own statement of proposal to his now wife was, will you suffer with me? And I thought to myself initially that that could not be a winning formula. Based upon all I know about male and female behavior, and I've accumulated a fair bit of knowledge on that topic matter, that simply could not be. I offered an analogy, for example, marriage and relationships being partly economic and in their totality transactional, the idea of you applying to a job and you telling the potential employer when he asks you, what are you going to bring to the table? What is it you're going to offer? You saying you're going to have a lot of bad days and you're going to screw up a lot. That seemed akin to his statement. The statement of, will you suffer with me? And so I probed and probed. But I realized all this abstract talking would not be of any benefit to anyone. So I decided to dig more deeply, and I got a little personal. I said, well, tell me about your marriage. Tell me about your situation, because I'm intrigued. Exceptions do typically confirm the rule, but hey, maybe you found, at the very least, some unicorn-esque female, neuroatypical for all I know. And then it all came out. It turned out that this gentleman, based on a remote European island, had a wife. But it also turned out that he had been in a state of mental decline and depression for years prior to meeting her. And it also turned out that he was not her first husband, but her second husband, and that she lived in the United States, and that they were separated by thousands of kilometers of distance, and that she also had a child by this other man, and that he was footing the bill for this child, although they rarely saw each other. And he went on to talk about their unique rapport and what have you. And it all unraveled. Everything you could have thought was there. This was, you could say, the quintessence of simpery, the quintessence of cuckoldry. But I have to say, I took no pleasure in receiving a vindication of both my beliefs and the knowledge that accords with those beliefs. I had no sense of satisfaction in recognizing that this guy was just another statistic, and more to the point, actually a meme. This guy was the embodiment of a meme. Some guy who had no success with women, who had been suffering most of his life, finding washed up used goods embodied in a woman on her second marriage, post-Wall, living separately, and we all know what she's doing there when he's not around, don't we? I don't need to talk about the erotic action taking place there, now do I? But it didn't give me any pleasure, any satisfaction whatsoever. He spoke at length prior in abstractions, but when we got to brass tacks, it was as I had predicted and had assumed. This was no unicorn, this was just a guy who had fallen for a trap. And there were other people in the room, other men, and all of them were, in turn, prior to this revelation, arguing in abstraction. But when that was revealed, they all displayed their cards too. One man in particular arguing along similar lines that had been in a decade-long depression that he had recently come out of. Another man, approaching 40, having prior discussed his romantic nature and how he doesn't want to give up on that, acknowledging that it might be too late for him, it might be GG. All the walls crumbled after this revelation. And as I stated before, with regards to this one gentleman, I didn't receive any sense of pleasure from any of this. It was confirming and vindicating in the worst and most saddening way possible. And let me explain why. Remember what I said at the beginning of this video. You are given this alternative of crumbs and stale pizza crust, and it's just enough to keep you alive. You will be nutritionally deficient. You're going to lack, most importantly, in micronutrients, in vitamins and minerals. But you might survive. In an emaciated state, you might just get by for a while longer. The alternative to that, of course, is, you guessed it, slow starvation. And eventually, annihilation. Think about that scenario and transpose yourself from that hypothetical scenario to another hypothetical. Because you who are listening to me right now, some of you might be more in line with the gentleman that I have discussed thus far, but many of you might be long past that. I strongly suspect most of you are. But for men like that, it is a question of the stale pizza crust and crumbs versus slow starvation. The kind of mentality and mindset that these types of men find themselves in does not allow for any alternative. The whole time during this lengthy discussion with him and a few of the others in the chat, I thought about so-called red pilling. But some guys you just can't reach. And this goes back to the topic of portals. The portal has been open to the many. But even then, with the portals everywhere, ubiquitous as they are, some men are simply not aware of them. They can't be, because the acknowledgement of the presence of the portal itself and the things contained therein would utterly destroy them. And thus you end up in a situation, as I've described, of borderline starvation, but survival, versus slow but inexorable road to death. And it's a very powerful principle. It demonstrates that some men can never be reached, and that the alternative to a horrible situation by any account, I think, none of us here would ever want to be in a situation where you were married, you saw your wife twice a year, and you were footing the bill for her child but not yours, and on top of that, she likely is engaging in all sorts of sexual festivities without you. But you knew all this originally. You heard it in Will You Suffer With Me? That is not a pickup line. We know that is not a pickup line. But the alternative to that is the destruction of the entirety of this person's worldview. This is why the red pill is not only not for everyone, it's for very, very few. It's in part why you see phenomena such as red pill rage. But there's some men that don't even get there. They're just destroyed by the acknowledgement of reality. It's all gone. It's that scenario of crumbs and stale pizza crust versus death. And it's important to be aware of these things, and I'll tell you why. Because apart from some men that are completely cut off in their psychology and their mentality from accepting a certain reality that they are part of, and they will deny it till the end, just like they will deny being in the Matrix, of course, by way of analogy. You need to be aware of the place and context in which you may or may not red pill a fellow man. Make them aware of certain things going on in their lives if they're not completely aware. But sometimes, as oblivious as they are, you have to be cognizant of the fact that you attempting to reach them, A, won't work, and to the extent that it might work, you would destroy everything about that person. There would be nothing left. Some men, to quote Cool Hand Luke, you just can't reach. So you get what we got here last week, which is the way he wants it. Well, he gets it. This guy, you have to understand this type of person. This guy, his best world scenario is to be that guy in a separate marriage, a geographically separated marriage, paying for another man's child, whilst his wife is engaging in sexual escapades, and he rambles on about sacrifice and suffering. And that's the best case, that's the best thing he can get. And believe it or not, it makes him far happier than the alternative, the slow, inexorable starvation that I mentioned at the beginning and have continually mentioned throughout this video. And that is what we're dealing with, gentlemen. Those are the depths. That is the abyss that not every man can look into. Looking into the abyss, it said, take care that you don't become a monster. You could see that embodied perhaps in Red Pill Rage. But some men look into the abyss and they're simply swallowed by it. Gentlemen, thanks for watching. As always, if I'm still alive, I'll check you out later. And more importantly, may the gods give you more than they take. Until the next time, enjoy your weekend. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.